Thank you. So for those who are just joining us, welcome back to the 1 in 3 Speakout. My name is Julia Reticker Flynn, and I am the campaign director of the 1 in 3 campaign at an organization called Advocates for Youth in Washington, D.C. I am privileged to be one of the hosts for this historic event. We are beginning the second hour of the first ever online abortion Speakout. Throughout the day, we'll hear from over 100 people talking about their experiences with abortion care. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks to the many people who will be joining us with their personal stories. As many of you know, 1 in 3 women will have an abortion in her lifetime in the United States. Despite the fact that abortion is very common, we rarely talk openly about our decisions to end a pregnancy. For too long, conversations around abortion have been dominated by politicians and anti-choice activists who use shame and stigma as a tool to silence people and to advance legislation that limits access to abortion services. Today, we are working to build a new conversation, one that is grounded in the lived experiences of real people, one that works towards building community rather than isolation, compassion rather than shame. We are shattering the silence. We honor the long tradition of Speakouts started on the eve of the historic Roe v. Wade decision. We also honor the long tradition of storytelling in social justice movements, the tradition of placing people and their lived experiences at the center of the conversation. Today, Advocates for Youth is grateful for the opportunity to host and bring together people from around the country to break through the stigma and shame people are made to feel around abortion and to highlight real people's experiences and stories with abortion care. In the first hour of the Speakout, we heard from Liz Winstead, who is the co-creator of Lady Parts Justice. We also heard from Dr. Parrott, an abortion provider in Washington, D.C., and many others. All of us have a role in shattering the stigma and ensuring that women have access to safe and legal abortion care. So today, if you have your own personal story and you would like to share it with us, visit www.1in3campaign.org to share your video or written story. I'm joined in this hour by my co-host, Sarah Dello, the Policy Director for Generation Progress. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks, Julia. I'm really, really excited to be here and participating in this awesome, awesome event.
Great. And I just wanted to get a sense of why you decided to join us today as part of the 1 in 3 campaign.
Absolutely. So I work at Generation Progress, and we are the millennial engagement arm of the Center for American Progress. And at Generation Progress, we work on the issues that are important to the lives of millennials across the country. Obviously, abortion access is one of those issues that are vitally important for our everyday lives. And so we're excited to be here to hear the stories of people who have had abortions, to break through the stigma, to try to create space for people to share their stories. And I'm just really honored that you all have reached out. I'm so excited that you're having this because it's long overdue.
Thanks, Sarah. We'd like to encourage everyone who's watching to go to our website and sign our pledge to end the stigma and shame around abortion. You can sign it right now online at www.1in3campaign.org. Sarah, will you introduce our first guest?
I would love to. Our next story comes from artist Fabiana Rodriguez, who created this amazing piece about her abortion story.
My name is Fabiana Rodriguez, and I'm an artist and an activist. My parents are immigrants, and I was their firstborn, and they invested everything they could into me. They put me in after-school math and science classes, after-school tutorial, bilingual programs, but my parents never taught me how to have a relationship, and they never talked to me about what kind of things I liked in people or what would attract me. It was almost like this big enigma. So many times as I was growing up, I had to perform for people, and that was the way that I got attention. And with my parents, I had to perform as the exceptional student and be all about math and science and be an overachiever. And with young men, I had to perform as kind of the sexy girl in order to get the kind of attention I wanted from them. And then when I finally had a chance at kind of being myself and really following what I wanted to do, which was to be an artist, right around that time is when I got pregnant. And I had told my lover that I was pregnant, and within a few days, he was on a plane to Chicago. And I was just in disbelief that he wouldn't answer my calls, that I couldn't find him, that he literally had disappeared. And so I had to have the abortion on my own. I had to find someone to drive me. I didn't tell my parents, and I had my abortion, and I didn't have regrets at all. In fact, I felt a sense of relief. And it taught me that, number one, I hadn't developed the tools to really assess who I was sleeping with or what to ask for or even how to negotiate what I wanted, but I also didn't have the lens to make decisions. I really thought this person was gonna be there for me, and when they weren't, I was like, wow. And here I am excelling at all aspects of my life. I'm, doing amazing art. I'm building websites. I'm, getting straight A's in my class. I'm being an exceptional person, and yet my love life is just in shambles. The reason I came out about my abortion was because in 2012, during the onslaught of anti-abortion laws, I realized that silence was costing us political power, and that everyone here saw a talented, empowered, young Latina woman, and if they only knew my abortion story, they would realize that behind all of these ways that we perform our excellence, there's also a lot of suffering that we don't talk about. And that actually we need to cast light on that, because when you have that suffering in the shadows and you feel isolated about everything from sex to abortion to love, then you can't really have a revolution. You can't transform that if you're in the darkness. And so I decided to come out. I didn't come out to my parents until just a few months ago. And it was empowering because I realized that the thing that I could do to change the way people perceive abortion is to share my story.
Thank you, Fabiana, for sharing your story and helping to shatter the stigma. I also want to say that I have a lot of Fabiana's art in my office, in my home, and so it's so exciting to see artists like her sharing their stories in these spaces because we need more artists. We need more people from different communities sharing their stories around abortion. And so thank you, Fabiana. And now we're joined via Skype by Farah, who will share her story. Farah, please start when you're ready.
Hi. My name's Farah. I live in Florida. My story was 25 years ago when I lived in Texas. I was 36 years old at the time. I had a daughter who was almost 3. I was married. We decided to have a second child. And because of my age, the insurance would pay for an amniocentesis. Being over the age of 35, you're at higher risk. So I decided to have that. And I was very shocked when the doctor called me himself 2 weeks later to tell me that there was an abnormality found. So immediately my husband and I went in to see him, had our blood drawn to check to see if we were carrying any unusual genetic components, and we were not. He said this was some sort of an anomaly that was very rare, and he suggested we go speak to a geneticist. So we did that. We spoke to a whole group of them in another city, and they all advised us that this was something very unusual that would probably result in a mental handicap. And being that we already had a healthy child and that I was young enough to have another pregnancy, we decided to terminate. That was the best thing for us, particularly for our daughter. We did not want to have the terrible situation of having a handicapped or mentally incapable child that would take resources and time away from our little daughter. It was something that I had the foresight to do, and I was fortunate enough to have the information. A lot of people, faced with something like that, they don't know. They just have a child and it's got a handicap and they deal with it. But in my case, I was able to make a choice because I was presented with information. And that information I was really thankful to have. So I did have the abortion. It was almost 20 weeks. I was sort of maybe the beginning of the 5th month, so it was rough. It was difficult. I had to be put into labor. I had to go into the hospital. It took a long, long time. It was many hours. I actually delivered the baby. It was sad. It was very sad. It was very emotional. You know, your hormones are all messed up because here you were, you know, pregnant one day and not the next day, and far enough along that it, you know, I felt it. It was really rough. But I had no regrets as far as anything moral. I felt like I did the morally correct thing because I protected the child that I already had. And, you know, I did what was merciful for the child. I didn't want him to have to be in this world, as difficult as it is. You know, with a handicap, it would be so much worse. So I feel like I did the right thing for me. Me, my husband, my child, God, you know, the universe, whatever. It was the right choice for me. And I was very grateful that I had the choice, being that that was in Texas. And it's even worse now. So, you know, and I am old enough to remember when there was no choice. I was in college when Roe v. Wade passed. And I knew a lot of people in high school that had children because there was no choice. There was no birth control available. There was no abortion. So I've always felt very strongly that women should have the free choice to do whatever they choose with their bodies, and it is nobody else's business, particularly not politicians. So I have been politically involved for many years, and I will remain that way for the rest of my life because I think women's rights are extremely important, and it's a real value to me. And I do this for my daughter and for all other women.
Thank you so much for sharing that and helping to shatter the stigma. I think that Farah brought up a lot of really amazing points, especially when we're talking about young people's access to information, young people's access to contraception, and support for young people when they decide to make whatever decision that they choose to make. I think also as someone who has lived in Texas and taught at a school that was an abstinence-only campus and had students who didn't have access to support services, you know, this is a really important thing that we bring up now. It's been an issue that we faced in Texas for a long time, and of course is an issue that we're going to face moving forward as we're seeing clinics close because of horrible decisions by politicians there. So thank you again, Farah. Julia, do we have another guest?
Yeah, we'll be joined in a minute by Jessica Gonzalez Rojas, the Executive Director of the Latina Institute for Reproductive Health. But I just wanted to go back and talk a little bit about Fabiana's artwork because I think she also brings to us the point that artists are really sort of the originators of culture change and asking people to think differently about issues that matter to us. And so, you know, we are really thrilled to partner with many artists throughout the 1 in 3 campaign, including Fabiana Rodriguez and Tania Ikeda, who actually helped create that documentary that she put together. She is an incredible filmmaker and documentary maker, and so we're really excited. And you know, too often, you know, this is really an opportunity. The 1 in 3 campaign sees it an opportunity to hear directly from people and hear directly from artists as well as they worked with us to change culture. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody has to be involved if we're trying to break through stigma. It's the activists, it's the artists, and people from all kinds of art, whether we're sharing via comedy or we're, like Liz Winstead often is doing, or if we're looking at music, or if we're looking at pieces that we're gonna, you know, hang in our living rooms and offices or put on bumper stickers. I mean, everybody has a role, especially if we're talking about a culture shift, because at the end of the day, we shouldn't have stigma around abortion. Women should be able to make the best decisions for themselves, for their families, and it's going to take all of us to really make that change happen.
Yeah, and later today we'll be excited to hear from Sonia Renee, who some of you might know is an incredible spoken word artist, and she'll be sharing some of her poems and pieces with us around challenging that stigma around abortion. So that's another piece coming up that we encourage you to watch.
So excited. Sonia Renee is one of my activist crushes. I have said this publicly many times, so it's incredible that Sonia Renee is going to be participating. I'm excited.
Yes, so if you're just joining us, we want to welcome you to the 1 in 3 Speakout. And throughout the day, people will be sharing their stories about abortion, sharing their very personal experiences. And many of these stories are unique. No two stories are exactly the same, but what is powerful about people coming together is really uplifting the voices and centering the conversation around people's real lives. And we'll also know that people are not alone. And so next we're going to come back to Jessica Gonzalez-Rojas in a few minutes. But first we're going to hear from a woman named Liz who's going to share her story with us. When you're ready, go ahead, take it away, Liz.
Hi, my name is Liz, as I've been introduced. And sorry, I'm getting over a cold. But my story starts with a relationship that I was in. I was living with a boyfriend at the time, and the relationship started to go in a more non-healthy direction. And after he got home from work one day and started playing video games, I then had built up the courage to put everything on the table and to really try to talk about the relationship and what I needed. And he made it very clear that he was not going to do that for me. So we had a very long argument, and after some time, I said, let's just put this on pause. We'll get back to it in the morning. And we went to sleep. And I had the unfortunate experience of waking up to some very non-consensual things happening. My response was to freeze. And when it was finally over, I took a minute to process and said, I will be leaving. Please don't ever contact me again. And I packed up my car and moved back to my mother. And then I became violently ill. I could hardly stand for more than 20 minutes before feeling incredibly sick and incredibly nauseated. I was throwing up constantly, and it didn't hit me what I was really going through until I finally missed my period. And by that time, I'd missed classes, I'd missed work, and I called a friend of mine who sat with me while I took the test, and I saw the result and nearly fainted. I was in no place to have a child. I was just 21. I hadn't finished my degree yet. I was living with my mother, and I was also dealing with the aftermath of being violated sexually and having that retrigger events from earlier in my life. And I knew that I could not bring that child into the world and give it the life that it deserved. And I spent a lot of time going over my options and evaluating everything and deciding what was right for me. And I talked to my family, and they all supported me in whatever decision I decided. And my mother and the friend who sat with me during the test took me to the clinic, where I was met with anti-abortion activists. And that really shattered everything, where they were screaming at me, having no idea what I was already going through. And that really stung, but it didn't deter me from what I needed to do for myself. And I opted for the medical abortion. I took the first set of pills in the clinic, which you're supposed to do. And they told me about counseling options. They really went over all the information with me in the initial intake interview. And I felt safe and supported, and was able to return home, where I then 12 hours later took the second set of pills. And it was, hi. My sister just walked in. So anyway, I then took the second set of pills, and there was an unbelievable amount of cramping that I was not prepared for. They tell you about it, but experiencing it is a completely different ballgame. And after quite some discomfort and my sister holding my hair while I puked, I then was able to relax, and everything just felt very official. It felt very, very okay. And I could return to school the next day and return to work. And I have no regrets about my decision. It was definitely the right thing for me to do at the time. And, you know, it's everything that's taken into consideration. I meet people who speak out very openly against abortion, and I share my story, and I, you know, try to say that you never know who you're going to meet who's been through something like that, and to question their motives behind something it's kind of rude, but you know, you also just don't understand what they've gone through to make their decisions. It's not one to be taken lightly by any means. And I'm very fortunate that I had the support that I did, and that I was able to pay for the procedure myself, and that my state has very supportive laws right now, which I hope will never go away ever, because that option needs to be available for everyone. The idea of unsafe abortion is terrifying to me. And I share my story to all of you, and I hope that I am well received.
You absolutely are, Liz, and thank you so much for sharing your story and helping to shatter the stigma. We're really glad that you shared your story. Can you talk about why you made that decision to share your story?
I think part of the reason why I wanted to share my story was, again, to shatter the stigma, but to also provide some other perspectives. The process of going through the decision, of being, of the unfortunate situation that I was in, and that hopefully I could reach somebody else out there who has been through something similar, or is needing to decide something, or they may still not quite understand what all goes into making their decisions. And I'm hoping that in sharing my story that I can provide some sort of perspective, or just a little detail that can help reach somebody who has had an abortion and doesn't feel supported, and to reach people who are still trying to make their own decisions about how they feel about abortion.
Liz, thank you once again. You know, Julia, Liz brought up a lot of really important issues in sharing her story. One, she was talking about being in a domestically abusive relationship. She was assaulted. She had to deal with these horrible protesters outside of clinics who now can go all the way to the front door because of the Supreme Court's horrible decision this year. And she talked about having support from siblings and family. And I think, you know, that's one of the reasons that we're here today, is it's to provide space for those to share their stories, but also to make sure that the 2 and 3 are supporting those who have had abortions.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, for many of these people who are sharing their stories today, it's the first time they've shared their stories. And I think as viewers, as all of you who are watching this, it's really important that you sort of show your support for people like Liz and other folks who come forward and share their experience. I'm sure they would love to hear from you using the hashtag 1in3speaks and hear affirmations and hear support, because coming forward and sharing your story and sharing very personal pieces of your lives is very vulnerable, and it's a very powerful act. And we ask all of our viewers to show that support to these individuals who are coming forward. And I think it's been really exciting to see Liz and many others who have come forward today and sort of sharing those experiences. We also have an opportunity for you to take a pledge. So it's not only the 1 in 3 women who are asking to sort of speak out, but also the others, everyone who can come forward and take a pledge and share and stand up and say, I pledge to speak out against stigmatizing language around abortion. And I think if everyone did that, we would have the power to really shift the culture around abortion.
Absolutely. You know, While I personally have not had an abortion, I have had a late period. And it's something that, you know, a lot of us encounter, that we might be on some type of birth control, but sometimes you can forget to take a pill. Sometimes you forget to put a condom on. Like, mistakes happen, things happen. And so we could all, the 2 and 3 of us who have not had abortion, very well could become part of that 1 and 3. And so it's just as important for us to speak out and create space for our family, for our friends, for our community to share their own stories, because we could be right there with them. And as someone who has taken young women to clinics, someone who has taken young women past those horrible protesters, like, this is what we should do as women, as community, is to support each other in the decisions that we're all making every single day.
Thanks, Sarah. I understand our guest has an interesting approach to story sharing.
Yes, we're now joined via Skype by Heather Ault, the founder of 4,000 Years for Choice, a project that highlights the thousands of years of history of contraception and abortion. Heather will start by sharing her story. Start whenever you're ready, Heather.
Hi there, thanks so much for having me on. Well, I'm an artist and an activist, and indeed my story begins with an abortion, and it also kind of continues on with the way that I've created artwork around that experience that kind of resonates with me and hopefully with others who've had this experience. And so when I was in my late 20s, I had an abortion. It was a relationship that wasn't good for me. It was a very short-term relationship, and I immediately knew that I wasn't ready to be a parent. The abortion was great. I had it at a Planned Parenthood. And what was most surprising to me was months later how the stigma of this experience, kind of the shame and my own desire to be kind of perfect, to achieve all the things I wanted to, felt very different because of having had an abortion. And it was truly a surprise to me. So what I ultimately found that became the spark for this amazing artistic journey that I've been on is the ancient history of abortion. What had never occurred to me was that there was any history really prior to Roe v. Wade or back alley abortions, as though women literally had been like living in the dark ages.
So it looks like we've lost Heather for a minute, but hopefully she'll be coming back soon, because I think this is really important. Abortion care is not something that's new. And yet we see people acting like it's something that's just been around for like the last 20 years or something. Well, pre-Roe, obviously, but.
Yeah, and I really do hope Heather can come back and share with us, because she has some really incredible artwork that she's been bringing to conferences and bringing across the country, really showing the historical progress around abortion access. And
so it sounds like Heather may be back now, so let's see if we can hear a bit more from Heather about what she's been working on.
Okay, I think I'm online again. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, so this incredible history really shifted the stigma dramatically for me. And so since then, try to popularize and express this experience I had. So I'll kind of do a show and tell with some of the work that I've created. This is the history of abortion and contraception. It's a series of 50 posters, and each one of them is designed to tell one of these unique stories going back 4,000 years. And so that project is sort of where I began as an artist. And then since then, I've also been creating other types of graphics. For example, here are memes that I've created for Facebook that are also greeting cards. So these are kind of individual artistic pieces to describe one woman or one point of view or one person's experience with abortion, and hopefully open up conversations around this experience. And another piece of work that I've designed is a uterus symbol. And one of my critiques of the pro-choice movement is that we've been hanging on to a coat hanger symbol for decades. as a major symbol to talk about abortion. And honestly, I couldn't think of anything more stigmatizing than a coat hanger. While the symbol has so much historical relevance, it's something that is, doesn't give us supportive or affirming kind of icon to sort of rally around in terms of our personal experiences. And then finally, I'll just show one more project, and it's the uterus apparel. There's shirts here. I'm wearing one as well. And anyway, it's the uterus symbol has been a really fun one because so many people enjoy it. They laugh about it. They're curious what it is. It's really fun and playful. And in my own abortion story, it would have been helpful for me to have a lighter view of it, to have seen it as an affirming, empowering, and historical experience, rather than something that was kind of based in a failure to use contraception properly or whatnot. So anyway, that is the work that I'm doing, and I'm excited to share it in this venue. And a website at 4,000 if you want to look at any of the artwork or read the posters. I'd love for you to come there and visit. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Heather. And I know after this, I will be going to 4,000 Years of Choice to order your artwork because I love the uterus. I need it for my walls, my office, and my home. I think we all do. So thank you again. So next up, we are joined on set by Deb Hauser, who is the president of Advocates for Youth and a mentor of mine, former boss, to be completely honest. So Deb's going to share with us a little about the history of the 1 in 3 campaign, as well as her own story. Deb?
So it's a really wonderful thing to be here today. I'm really honored to be able to share my story and to bring the 1 in 3 campaign to everyone. It's just an honor to be among the 100 people that are going to tell their story today and really try and shatter the stigma. So for me, in 1995, at about age 35, I found myself alone and caring for a 6-month-old. I actually was pregnant, I was actually married, but my husband had gone to work one day and he didn't return. He had a history of mental health issues, and we didn't hear from him for weeks. It was probably a month later, and I didn't tell anyone that he was gone, not my family, not my coworkers, not my friends. I simply went to work each day and attended to my job, pretending everything was fine. And I would leave at night and pick up my son from daycare, and I would do my best to distract myself and him. But time passed and I realized that I was pregnant, and my husband still hadn't returned. I didn't know where he was. And I thought it really was time for me to think carefully about what my next move was. It was clear to me that I couldn't care for yet another child. I didn't know where my husband was. I didn't know what would happen to my marriage, and I wasn't really sure how I was going to make ends meet or how I could bring another child into such an untenable situation. And it was at that point that I chose to have an abortion. It was by far the best choice for me and for my circumstances. Much later, my husband returned. He was diagnosed a little while later with bipolar disorder. But he really couldn't stay on his medication, and after a little while he took his own life. That being said, to this day I am 100% sure that choosing the abortion was the most responsible action that I could have taken at the time, and that was both for me and for my son. Today, my life is completely different. I'm remarried, I'm very happy. My son is 20 years old and he's in college. And he's doing really well and studying engineering. And I am forever grateful that I was given the opportunity to provide for him as I was able to do. And I have to say that for about 15 years, as you both know, I didn't share this story with anyone. And one day, the staff here at Advocates for Youth, we were so frustrated by all of the politicized debate and the anti-abortion legislation that continued to pass in the states, that we began to talk about what was needed for a new cultural dialogue around abortion. How could we shift the cultural narrative? We really were looking for one to be steeped in empathy, to be cognizant of the complexity of women's lives, and to be supportive of safe abortion access for all women. And we recognized that we needed to speak more from our hearts, to tell our own personal stories, to give a face to the experiences of women throughout the ages. A young woman on staff, you might remember, she heard us talking about all of this, and she said to us, she was a teen parent, I think, but she was already in her 20s, and she said to us, I've never heard these stories. And we asked her, well, you know, is it because nobody in your family's ever had abortion, or is it because no one ever talks about it? And she told us at that point about her own abortion story, and I remember how powerful it was for her to say that she had been pregnant and got pregnant yet again and didn't have enough money for the abortion, that she literally had to go to 3 different people in her family to get enough money for the abortion. So how was she ever going to have enough money to pay for the child? So when she told her story, I felt like she was kind of hanging out there by herself and that I needed to share my own story. And so I told her about mine. And I realized that day that we're not so different, that as we shared our stories, we realized that women have had abortions across the generations, and that if we share those stories, that we can build alliances and find our voices and find community. And that's really what the 1 in 3 campaign is about. Now when I go across the country and I talk about my story and I share, what I find is that more often than not, other women begin to share their stories. They speak up, and some of them are people I've known for many years. It could be a family member or a friend. Sometimes it's complete strangers, and the result is a bond that's stronger than the anti-abortion rhetoric, or the fear of retaliation or from violence that too often finds its way into the political debate. In its place, we've found some empathy for the complexity of women's lives, for the commonalities that bind us, and for the need to keep abortion safe and available. So I'm so thrilled that we're all here and that we're doing this today, and I can't thank you both enough for being such amazing hosts and sharing all of your experiences along with the women who are calling in.
Thank you, Deb. And we're so glad to be here and to have these stories shared. I mean, I remember when the conversations about the 1 in 3 campaign were happening around the office, and I talked with friends later over dinner who I don't know from sexual health advocacy or organizing, and they started sharing their own stories after just talking about this initial idea of a campaign of how do we share our stories further. So just, I mean, it literally was like within a week that happened. And I was like, okay, we've got something really powerful here, and it's been exciting to see how much the campaign has grown since then.
Yeah, and I would just echo exactly what Sarah said, is when we started this campaign and began to talk about the work that we were doing, a lot of people came up to me and my family and started sharing their stories. And I think this really builds that powerful idea that as we open doors for people to share their experiences, that more people will build community. And now we're joined on Skype by Jenny Kutner, a Salon writer with a personal connection to abortion storytelling. Welcome, Jenny.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Jenny, can we start with you sharing a little bit about your story with us?
Yeah, so I turned 23 on August 5th of this year, and 3 days before that, I had an abortion, which was a decision I made partly because I'm 23 years old, and at this time in my life, I'm neither financially nor emotionally equipped to be a parent, have a child, be pregnant. And so I decided to have an abortion long before I was actually faced with the real choice, before I got pregnant. It was something that I did think seriously about for a very long time, and something that I think seriously about not just in the context of my own life, but in the context of a lot of women's lives, because I write primarily about feminist issues. And so I thought a lot about it, and the decision ultimately wasn't difficult for me as a result of spending so much time on it. And in the week before my abortion, I decided to write about it for Salon because I found that my own experience was really ordinary, albeit very privileged, which is one thing that I reflected on a lot as it was happening. I'm originally from Texas, and so I'm very, very familiar with the abortion restrictions there. And I found myself thinking a lot that I'm very grateful that I live in New York City now, where I had really easy access to a safe medical abortion. I was able to connect with my doctor after the fact, and I was able to interview her, and we've become close friends. But additionally, there were other circumstances I was able to pay for my abortion without worrying about it. My family and my partner were extremely supportive of me. And so I had ideal circumstances for a situation that is never really ideal. No one wants to have an abortion. I certainly didn't want to have an abortion, but it was the right decision for me. And I'm so glad that I not only had the opportunity to make that choice for myself, but that I had access to the care that I needed.
I think you bring up really important points about access, and we're going to talk about that more. You also shared your story, or before you even had an abortion, you shared in Salon that you were planning to have an abortion. Can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to do that and what the response was to you sharing that piece?
So again, I did find that my experience was really pretty ordinary. I did what I needed to do not to get pregnant because I had an IUD, which I had gotten about a year before I became pregnant. My IUD failed because sometimes things like that happen, and that's life. And I decided to have an abortion. And I think a lot of women have that story. And I think that a lot of women do share that story, but they usually share it after the fact, when everything's said and done, for a lot of really good reasons. I think part of that is, obviously you can speak to a whole experience once you've finished the experience, and what's done is done. But I think a lot of that is out of concern for safety and as a way of avoiding stigma, which is smart. But at the same time, I, as a woman who was having an abortion, I wanted to read about what other people had gone through beforehand, and those stories were noticeably lacking. And so I figured that if that was a story that I wanted, I could only imagine how many other people would have wanted the same story. And so I found myself in a position to tell it, and I did.
Thanks, Jenny. That's really inspirational. And I'm wondering if you recently wrote about some research around storytelling. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about this piece in the research that you wrote about around people sharing their stories.
Yeah, definitely. So the research is fascinating. These researchers essentially found that while there's this belief that many people who are anti-choice or pro-life tend not to associate with people who have had abortions, it's actually that they just don't know that they're associating with people who have had abortions, which makes sense. As 1 in 3 women has had an abortion, the numbers would lead one to believe that more people are associating with women who have had abortions than they think. And the reason for that is that they found that this stigma around abortion and reproduction and sex leads a lot of women not to feel safe telling their anti-choice or pro-life friends that they have had an abortion, and that they're much, much more likely to tell pro-choice friends who have expressed a belief in, a woman's right to choose what is right for her body. And so they're saying that it contributes a lot to attitudes toward abortion staying so steady for so many decades. And I think it's unfortunate because on the one hand, as someone who has spoken up about my own abortion and who has listened to so many stories from so many other women, there's a part of me that wants everyone to speak up because I think that it could lead to some real change. On the other hand, there's every woman has to do what's right for her and for her family, and not everyone should have to speak up. It's unfortunate that we need these stories so desperately in order to try and remove this stigma.
Thank you, Jenny. I think that's a really interesting piece of research, and thank you so much for all the work that you've done around this issue. And I think one thing that you really bring up that's pretty maybe common sense, but this idea that people are more likely to share their lived experiences and their sort of personal stories with people they think might be receptive. Mm-hmm. And I think that really brings us back to the point that for all of you, all of the viewers and all the folks who are out there, really being vocal about your support and being vocal about your openness to talk about these issues and have these conversations and invite friends to dinner and talk about our lives really opens the door for more of this conversation. And never do we want to, force or push people to share their stories. No one should ever have to defend their decisions to make this decision, to have an abortion. But what we're trying to do with this campaign is really open space for people to talk about their lived experiences on their own terms and share who they are and their authentic selves. And what we've seen time and time again is as we create those spaces, whether it's online, whether it's through the Speakout, whether it's at a dinner party and with your friends, that doing so really opens the door for other folks to be part of it.
Absolutely. No one should have to feel alone because we, as the campaign is called, it's 1 in 3 campaign for a reason. And certainly it's a responsibility for all of us to create space for people to share their stories because that's how we make real change happen in this country. So now I'm really excited to share a statement from the fantastic Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky of Illinois. Congresswoman Schakowsky says, "I am proud to support the work of Advocates for Youth's 1 in 3 campaign to end the abortion stigma. Abortion should remain safe, legal, accessible, and affordable, and we must safeguard that access for women in all communities. Yet, for too long, women have been silenced and made to feel shame about their abortion experiences. This is why I am grateful for the women who have shared their stories and have made clear that they, not politicians, should make decisions about their own health and well-being. With all the political commotion on this issue, we must not forget that this is about the lives of women who are exercising their legal right to have an abortion. We need a new conversation about abortion, one that moves beyond the rhetoric and focuses on the real experiences of women and allies. We need to fight against any legislation that seeks to restrict access to safe, legal, and affordable abortion care. That is why Advocates for Youth's Abortion Speakout is so important. We know that 1 in 3 women will have an abortion in their lifetimes. By joining together to end the silence and engaging in a personal conversation about abortion in our society, supporters of abortion rights are empowered to publicly take a stand. We also must support women throughout our nation who are facing ballot measures, clinic closures, and legislation that attempt to undermine women's rights. Thank you to all the advocates for being on the front lines of this fight for abortion rights. I will always stand firmly with you all on this issue." Well, thank you so much, Congresswoman Schakowsky, for standing with people sharing their stories today, for helping to end the silence and engage in a new conversation about abortion in our society, and for fighting for safe, legal, and affordable abortion access. It was a pleasure to hear from you today and know that we have you by our sides. And frankly, we need more like Congresswoman Schakowsky. She is one of those rock stars that, when people get so frustrated with what's happening today in Congress, that's one of the members that I point to who are like, well, but look at Congresswoman Schakowsky, look at Congresswoman Barbara Lee, look at Congressman Quigley. Like, these are folks who are standing with us on an issue that far too many are not touching. But now I am happy to welcome Brittany, who is the Deputy Director of the Chicago Abortion Fund, a fantastic organization. Brittany joins us by Skype and will share her story. Welcome, Brittany. Please start whenever you're ready.
Hey, this is such an honor to be on this Abortion Speakout. Like you mentioned, I'm Deputy Director at Chicago Abortion Fund. And we provide financial assistance to women who are seeking primarily their second trimester procedures. I decided to share my story because I've come through this organization as someone who needed funding. In 2007, I became pregnant. I was already a mother of three daughters. I was sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with my sister. My children and myself all shared, 1 bedroom. I was working part-time at a local grocery store. At the time, I thought that I was mentally ill and was suffering from depression. I was later diagnosed a few years after that. But at the time, I knew that financially, mentally, just physically, I could not afford to add an addition to our family and to carry a pregnancy to term. And I made the choice to have an abortion, but I didn't know that I wouldn't be able to access my choice. I had to miss work just to make it to my appointment. Now, I'm already working part-time and have to pay bills, rent, feed my children, buy diapers, etc. So I had to miss work, but even getting an appointment scheduled was a struggle. I didn't know how much it would cost. I believe at the time I was told it was about $700, and that was my monthly income. I found out about Chicago Abortion Fund, and I was able to pay for my procedure. But even getting to that appointment was hard. It was hard. I had to miss work. I had to find a babysitter for my other children. I had to have a 2-day procedure. So all of those things contributed into not being able to really access abortion, not just the cost, not to mention the stigma from my family, friends, community, just society. Being able to, access it was a problem. So after I received funding from the Chicago Abortion Fund, I became more involved with the organization through just some follow-up calls and just them trying to check on me and see if everything was going okay in my life, like outside of that. And so coming into an organization that were really engaging in women who've also had abortions, and they're in this group, this leadership group, and they're sharing their experiences amongst each other, and also locally and sometimes nationally sharing their experiences throughout the country, it really empowered me and inspired me to share my story. I remember when I first started talking about my abortion experience, I was still carrying around a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. And I really couldn't understand why. I really couldn't articulate that that's what was going on, but looking back on it, that's definitely what it was. And so it just inspired me and encouraged me to always share my experience, no matter where I am or who I'm talking to or what's going on. If ever there's an opportunity to talk about abortion and why I chose it and why that's okay, and how we also need to think about access when we're also having a conversation about abortion, I see that opportunity all the time, because again, it's so much stigma, it's so much shame. Society silences us and tells us that our stories and our lives and our experiences don't matter. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Brittany, for sharing your story. And one of the reasons why I adore the Chicago Abortion Fund, it's exactly what Brittany was talking about. Is she hit on how that abortion would have cost her $700, which is what she made a month. Now, in what world can we possibly put that expectation on people to have to dedicate an entire month's salary to paying for an abortion? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think one of the things that she brings up is people always ask us, like, what is the cost of an abortion? And, depending on when you have an abortion, early on it can be about $400 to $500, and it can rise each week up into the thousands of dollars. And it's really important. There's a network of funds hosted by the National Network of Abortion Funds that's really working towards filling that need because, unfortunately, abortion is not covered in Medicaid and most governmental programs. And so what we're seeing is a real need for people to be able to access these services and an unmet need. And so These incredible funds have set up all across the country. They're primarily volunteer run, and they've really worked to step in and work to address that issue.
Yeah, as a former board member of the National Network of Abortion Funds, I really want to encourage people to check these funds out. Go to the National Network of Abortion Funds website, find a fund in your community, or if your community has a decent amount of access, check out funds in other parts of the country. For example, we've been talking about Texas a lot. The T Fund, the Lilith Fund, they're all doing really great work to help fill the gaps as there's facing so many clinic closures in Texas. Of course, the Chicago Abortion Fund is another great place where people should look. And, especially when talking about Chicago Abortion Fund, one of the things I think is so amazing is they work to invest in the women that they help fund to take leadership roles in the organization. Because at the end of the day, we really need to be making space, and this is why the Speak Out is so important, for those who have had abortions to share their stories and to ultimately lead this movement, right?
Yeah. Definitely. I think that what you're bringing up is a really important piece and a really exciting model that the Chicago Abortion Fund has really pioneered, and we're seeing replicated across the country. And we're really grateful to Brittany, who brought up that piece. Next up, we're thrilled now to share with you a pre-recorded message from Jessica Valenti, a writer and journalist with The Guardian, author of The Purity Myth and Why Have Kids, and the founder of the website Feministing. She is sharing her story and this story publicly for the first time today.
Hi, my name is Jessica Valenti, and this is my contribution to the 1 in 3 campaign. I'm a feminist author. I write a column for the Guardian US. I'm a mom. The first time that I got pregnant, I was in my 20s. I was in a relationship that I knew was not going anywhere, that it wasn't going to last. And I knew I wasn't ready to be a parent. So almost immediately when I found out, I knew I was going to end the pregnancy. And I did pretty early on. It's not something that stayed with me. It's not something that caused me a lot of trauma or grief. The overwhelming feeling that I remember was relief. And I remember how compassionate and wonderful the providers and nurses were. And so when I think about that abortion, that's really what I think about is the compassion there. Not too long after that, just a few months in fact, I met the man that I would end up marrying. And a couple of years after that, I got pregnant with our daughter Layla, which we were very, very excited about. But unfortunately, about 28 weeks into that pregnancy, I got really ill. I developed something called preeclampsia, which is extremely high and dangerous blood pressure, and it's something that some pregnant women get. So I was admitted to the hospital immediately. I went into the doctor. They took my blood pressure. They admitted me to the hospital. At the time, they sort of thought that they could just monitor me through the rest of my pregnancy, and that would be okay. But unfortunately, about 3 days after I went into the hospital, I developed a complication of preeclampsia called HELP syndrome, which is life-threatening, and it meant my liver was starting to fail. So the only sort of choice that we had, the only way for me to get well, the only way for me not to die, was to deliver Layla, even though it was, 28 weeks, it was very early, and she was born weighing 2 pounds, 2 ounces, and stayed in the hospital for 8 weeks. She stayed in the NICU for 8 weeks, and it was awful. It was awful to come that close to losing her and losing my own life. And it's hard to come back from being that sick and feeling that sort of fear and watching your child go through an incredible amount of pain and medical interventions. It was really difficult. And we knew after that, and doctors advised my husband and I that I should not get pregnant again because the chances of the same thing happening again were very high. I could get sick even earlier in my pregnancy, and I might not be so lucky that time. I could die. And even though that was a very depressing thought, I had always wanted 2 children. We resigned ourselves to that. But sometimes things don't work out the way that you plan them to, even if you're planning very carefully. And when my daughter was 3 years old, I got pregnant again. And it shattered me. It nearly destroyed me. It was horrible, because I really wanted to have another child. I still really would like that. It felt like a huge loss when we knew that we couldn't have any more. So to get pregnant it was just terrible. It was terrible, and we spent a lot of time talking to doctors, and they all sort of told us the same thing, that of course, if I chose to, I could continue with the pregnancy, but I would be putting my life at risk. And even though it took us some time to make the decision, I think I always knew that we had to end the pregnancy, because this wasn't just about me. This was about my family and about my daughter, who loved me and needed me. And when push came to shove, when I thought about getting pregnant and perhaps this happening again, even if I was okay, but if I was to have to deliver early again to put another baby through what my daughter went through, seemed unthinkable to me. I couldn't do it. So we decided to end the pregnancy, and I actually went back to the same clinic that I did so many years earlier, where they were so wonderful and compassionate. And again, they were very wonderful and compassionate. But it was hard, and it's a year later, it continues to be hard. I think about that pregnancy a lot. But I think it goes to show, I think, that we like to think of abortions in one way. And oftentimes people don't understand that you can have a varying set of emotions depending on your particular circumstance, and whether a pregnancy is wanted or not wanted. And I think that that's a shame, and I think it's a shame, that we often have this hierarchy of good or bad abortions, that, like the abortion I had in my 30s after I was a mother was okay and understandable because my life was at risk, and that's that was a good decision. But that the abortion that I had in my 20s, when I simply just wasn't ready to be a parent, is not as excusable. And I don't believe that. I don't buy that. I don't think that there's this huge moral difference. These are different points in my life, and I feel differently about each pregnancy and those 2 abortions. But I don't believe that one was more right or correct than the other. I think both, at both points, I was doing what was right for me, what was right for my family, what was right for my future family. And I think it's important that we start talking about that and not holding up sort of tragic stories. And I think the pro-choice movement does this too. We tell stories like the one I just told about being very sick and having a very clear decision of, needing an abortion to make sure I was healthy. We tend to prioritize those stories over the sort of more commonly occurring stories, which are, I was not ready to be a parent, and I had an abortion as soon as I found out, and that's okay, and I was okay with it, and I am okay with it. And so thank you to the 1 in 3 campaign for giving people an opportunity to talk about their experiences. I'm certainly glad that I had a chance to talk about mine.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Jessica, and really feeling comfortable to share that really compelling and important story today.
All right, and so this just in. I always wanted to say that. It makes me feel very official, like I know what I'm doing here. But we just got a statement of support from another member of Congress. Let me go ahead and read this from the fantastic, if you need another member to be excited about and to follow in the midst of a challenging Washington, D.C., check out Congresswoman Gwen Moore from Wisconsin. Congresswoman Moore says, "I want to thank all of our friends and allies today for sharing their stories. Together with the help of Advocates for Youth's 1 in 3 campaign, we can put an end to the stigma that surrounds the critical issue of abortion. You can take pride in knowing that your efforts and advocacy will touch the lives of countless women across the nation. Thank you for empowering others to stand up for women's health." Well, thank you, Congresswoman Gwen Moore, for sharing that with the people today and standing with those who are sharing their stories, for helping to engage in a new conversation about abortion in our society, and for fighting for safe, legal, and affordable abortion access. We're unfortunately going to be saying goodbye to Julia for now, but thank you so much, Julia, for being a fantastic host for this.
Thanks, Sarah. It's been such an honor to hear from so many of you today, and I look forward to watching the rest.
Awesome. Thank you, Julia.